Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar celebrating International Women's Day 2026. Today's session will be hosted by Dr Vanessa Cook, Head of Positive Safety at Sentis, and we're delighted to be joined by guest panelists from Australian Women in Mining and Resources, the Australian Institute of Health and Safety, and Linfox. Together, they will explore how generosity, psychological safety, and shared opportunity accelerate gender equality and lift women and workplaces together. As we welcome attendees today from across our beautiful country and beyond, Sentis acknowledges the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognises their connections to land, waters, and community. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, and we do this because we truly value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture, and knowledge. Before we get started, while we do have everyone on mute, please share your questions, reflections, and ideas in our live chat, which you can open from the bottom of your meeting window. All questions will be answered during a Q&A period at the end of the session. Also note that the session is being recorded and you will receive an email with access to the session recording by Monday afternoon. With that, I'll pass over to Vanessa to kick us off. Vanessa.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jasmine. What a wonderful opening. And welcome everyone to this event. Today, our conversation is centered around the theme, Give to Gain, how generosity drives equality. When we talk about a generosity in a professional context, we're not just talking about kindness, although that's always important. We're talking about the intentional ways people use their influence to create opportunities for others, which might be through mentoring, sponsorship, advocacy, collaboration, and creating cultures where people feel safe to speak up and to contribute. In the health and safety profession, this idea is particularly powerful. Our work is fundamentally about looking out for one another, about creating environments where people can perform at their best and go home safe and well. And the same principles apply when we think about equity, inclusion, and leadership. You know, progress rarely happens in isolation. It happens when leaders share knowledge, open doors, amplify voices, and create cultures where people feel they can belong and thrive. So today we'll explore how leaders and our organisational systems can act as a multiplier for gender equality and create better outcomes across our professions. So today I'm delighted to be joined by three wonderful panellists. We have Julia Whitford, CEO of the Australian Institute of Health and Safety, who is helping shape the future capability, professionalism and leadership standards of the health and safety profession. Welcome, Julia.
Thanks, Vanessa.
And we have Eliza Young, Director of Australian Women in Mining and Resources and Senior Social Performance Advisor at TEAS, whose work is driving important conversations and research around women's experiences and opportunities in the resource sector. Welcome, Eliza.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And of course, we have Chris Wilks, GM of Safety, Health and Wellbeing at Linfox, who brings a strong organisational perspective on leadership, having worked across diverse range of industries in Australia and New Zealand. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Vanessa.
Wonderful. So we're going to jump into some questions now. And Julia, I'll start off with you, but I will remind everyone that we love seeing your questions in the chat. Please do contribute and be involved in that chat. And we'll endeavour to get to some of your questions at the end of the session. So if you have particular questions for any of our panellists, please do pop them in there and I'll keep an eye on that. So Julia, I'd like to ask you the first question, and it comes from a systems and professional lens. Professional bodies play a powerful role in shaping expectations of leadership and professionalism. What role do organisations like yours play in amplifying voices that are traditionally underrepresented, without placing too much of the burden back on those groups just to have to push harder?
Sure. So we've got a responsibility and an opportunity here. We shape what good looks like, good leadership looks like, who speaks at our conferences, who is published, who is recognised or appointed to the board, etc. But if we want equality, we can't simply encourage underrepresented groups to lean in or push harder, as you said. That assumes that the system is neutral, and it often isn't. So our role is to redesign the system, not the people. And that means being intentional about who we invite to the table and not waiting for them to ask. So proactively sponsoring or advocating, using your words, for talented professionals who may not yet see themselves as leaders.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've often heard, and I've actually done it myself. Sometimes as a female, it's actually hard to ask for a seat at the table. So you're saying that you actively look for those people who you can, give them a go, get them that seat at the table so that they can then take off and thrive. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. Yep.
Fantastic. Eliza, I want to jump to you and your experience with AWMR. AWMR has called for government industry task force to focus on gender reform. Why do you feel that collective leadership and shared accountability is so critical, rather than just relying on the individual organisations to figure it out for themselves?
Yeah, excellent. It's a really good question, Vanessa. And if I come back to what Julia said around, having a seat at the table and having advocacy and promotion of underrepresented people within any industry, I think we should all be in a position where we come to work and we feel our best selves, so that we can be our best selves for our family. So AWMR, that's Australian Women in Mining and Resources, we recently released a report that looks into a few recommendations, one of which, thank you, is around a task force being established. And what this task force aims to do is, whilst we are, participating, female women in mining is improving, but progress into those positions of influence and authority, asking for that seat at the table or being in a position to gain that opportunity, it is uneven. We do know that. We do know that, female leaders within our mining industry are underrepresented in comparison to our males. So what we're trying to do is look at something from a systematic point of view, rather than organisational or local or state-based. And that's what AWMR aims to do, is to collaborate and cooperate with as many industry bodies as we have, and also our local and state-based women organisations who are doing fantastic work to promote, to engage, and also hopefully to get to a position where we can retain females within our industry so we can fill that pipeline. So when we talk about, collective leadership or shared accountability, it isn't just what we can do for our team. It's not what we can just do for our company. It will take a significant systemic shift. And we have seen wins where that has occurred. But interestingly, I tested this question with my LinkedIn network. And they're looking at, which ways, how can the task force do that, respectfully and responsibly? It is around transition points. So how do we transition between, roles, but it also transition between, potential working for a different commodity in our industry, or transition to working for a contractor versus an owner operator. So those entry pathways are improving, but we know that we continue to lose capability at those key transition points around promotions, leadership positions, executive decision making. So there is that kind of peter off. So yeah, it's extremely important, and we look at it. We can't do things on our own. We need to try to come together and work towards that common goal. So yeah, to your question, it's extremely important for us, and hopefully, the call to action around establishing a task force to look at systemic opportunities or interventions is something that we will work towards this year.
Wonderful. And I should mention actually that Sentis partners with AWMR, and we really want to support the work that we do, and we're very proud of the work that you are doing. Do you want to give us a little bit more of an awareness of who AWMR is and what you do?
Yeah, excellent. I didn't want to be too promotional, Vanessa, but thank you very much. We are extremely honoured to partner with Sentis as one of our founding partners. So AWIMAR was established as an Australian body for our local and state-based women organisations. We have fantastic representation within those groups, but once again, they're operating from a state-based location. We're looking to amplify their voices and come together as an Australian group. We were formed within the last probably 18 months to 2 years. As there was a need seen with a few of our board members and current board members now as chairs of those local state-based organisations. They've seen a need to amplify their voice and be able to work collectively to achieve better outcomes for women in our industry. So AWIMAR was formed off the back of that. This was our first attempt last year was to release the report on some significant recommendations we feel around even the significance around data. We're all measuring things out there, but perhaps we're not measuring things consistently or enabling us to be able to understand the problem we're looking to solve or the progress we're making. So, AWIMAR is alive and happening, and we've just recruited 3 new board members as well. We're running committees, so we're available on LinkedIn, and also through our website. So thank you for that. And once again, thanks to Sentis for being our founding partner.
Wonderful, honoured. And Jasmine has just popped that your web address in the chat as well for those that would like to jump on and have a look. Now, Chris, I want to jump to you. And, I invited you into this conversation because you're from a very traditionally male-dominated industry. And when I came out to your office sometime last year, I think, to run a session, I actually noticed how many women were in the room, and there were some fantastic, open, really deep conversations happening in that room. So it gave me that indication that you've got a really good culture there. So I wondered what advice you would give to leaders in other male-dominated industries who want to create the conditions where women can not only enter the profession, but thrive and step into leadership as well.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I think probably to the heart of some of this stuff sits the values, and I know all organisations have values. We're sort of quite fortunate that 3 of our key values sort of stem back over 70 years when Linfox was founded by Lindsay Fox. And he talks quite fondly about why they were created, which is around trust, integrity, and loyalty. But it was all about making sure you're doing the right thing to look after people, look after customers, and look after the communities that you're working in. And you're right. We across our industry, and even at Linfox, we are quite underrepresented when it comes to having women in our workforce or even in leadership roles. And I think one of the really good things about those values that it encourages is to create real opportunities. And I think, Eliza said it before, it's about creating entry points where young women get a chance to dip their toes in and get a feel for what it's like to work in our industry. And, we're there's 3 programs that I'd mention, because these are programs that I guess anybody could also run if they was also in the similar spot to us. But we recently created the Driver Academy, a warehouse academy, and most people have a graduate program as well. But the real power of those programs is that they proactively go out and encourage women who may not have considered transport and logistics as a path of career employment, and give them a real taste of what it's like to work here. And, for us, we have about 3,000 drivers across our business, and we're really underrepresented when it comes to women. It's probably only about 60 to 70 out of that 3,000 that are women, which is, around 2 to 3%. But just in that Driver Academy program, when you create the opportunity, we had 24 new women that signed up and that are now driving for Linfox as a result of creating a program that really that allows them to test it out. So, so if you think about it, it does stem back to our real values, because it's about looking after people, but really the inclusion piece and giving opportunity is quite strong. So, we continue to work on that because it's a never-ending job. But that's just a nice example, I think, of where it's working so far.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and it's not about having to be perfect, but it's about making a start and looking for those opportunities to invite more women in. I might actually open this up to Julia and Eliza as well, because you've obviously got experience too of working with some very male-dominated industries. What advice do you have for organisations that may be feeling, gee, there's a long way to go? How do we get started? What are your thoughts on this topic?
You want to go, Julia?
Go.
Yeah, it's always that awkward. Oh, should I go? Should I not go? Will they go?
Sorry, I should have directed to one of you. Yeah.
Right. Look, I think it's a really good question, Vanessa, to ask. Is we still have a long way to go. Where do we go? Where do we start? Look, I think everyone is doing the best they can with what they've got out there most of the time. We come to work in a position where we don't aim to hurt anyone. We don't aim to, to cause harm in any way. We aim to make sure that we deliver what we can at the times that we're given, with the resources that we're given. I come back to, well, what can you do? Start saying good morning. If you're not saying good morning in the morning, start saying thank you. If you're not saying thank you, it's less about how do we change it just for women. It's more around how do we just make sure our workplaces are a safe place for everybody. So that would probably be, where do you start? Just start by being a good human. Sometimes that's enough to then spark something in somebody else to feel as if they've been seen. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and somebody, it was a stat was around disengagement. So some of them would much rather have somebody yell at you than not have somebody even recognize that you were there. So either which way, it's just that human connection that start by saying good morning and thank you to your team. And I think that will go a long way.
Absolutely. You're so correct. Sorry, Julie, go ahead.
I was going to say, and for me, I've been really fortunate that I've had boards actually invite me in and things like that. So it's people of all levels of influence and authority really proactively looking at this as an issue and getting people involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an interesting point you raised there, Eliza, that I guess there's many different things we can look at. It's how do we get more women in the industry? And Chris, you've done a lot of action there in terms of how do we create a space for female drivers and that sort of thing. So it's getting them into the industry. But then how do we create an environment where women want to stay and they feel comfortable and safe and seen and those sorts of things? I love this comment in the chat as well, that gender equality is not a women's issue, it's a human issue. It affects us all. And everyone knows that, Sentis, we talk a lot about the safety experience, and that means that we want to feel comfortable, seen, safe, valued and heard in our workplace. And that can start with the small things like saying hello, looking at how you can create a culture of kindness and respect in the workplace. So that helps keep the women that join our industries, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Julia,
sorry, Vanessa. It also makes the workplace better. Makes it better for everybody, right? We're not just trying to improve it for underrepresented team members, but once you do, the workplace becomes just a better place for us all to work at.
Absolutely. So, Julia, I'd like to dig a bit more into your own experience of leadership and looking back on your leadership journey. What forms of generosity, it might have been mentoring or sponsorship, advocacy, or being given a voice, what has had the biggest impact on you in terms of your own leadership journey?
A really good question. I feel I have been so fortunate to have had so many great leaders in my career journey. Both male and female, which has been really positive. I have been, as I mentioned before, invited by boards to come into the boardroom and be an observer, understand the questions they like to ask or the information they need to know, which helped me understand how to build papers or things like that for the board. I've also been fortunate to have acting roles, so making sure I put my hand up for any opportunity that came along during my career. I've been asked by other people because I think I don't have a strong physical presence. And so for me, it was more about capability and leadership that I could create my own influence. And so again, fortunate enough that I've had organisations put me through tertiary qualifications. So I'm on the same footing as anybody else that would go for that next job.
Yeah, wonderful. So it sounds like it's sort of a two-way process. We need to encourage women and those underrepresented people within our organisations to actually put their hand up and be courageous enough to take that step, to want to step into maybe a bigger opportunity. But we also need sponsorship. We need people to look out for and recognise the capability in people and actually invite them. So sometimes we need a little nudge, don't we, to take those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, the leaders that said to me, "You belong here," and gave me access to the rooms before I felt fully ready, I felt that trust. And it was about authority doesn't come from volume or stature, it comes from substance.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, Chris, over to you. From a leadership perspective, what does actively supporting women to advance their careers actually look like in practice? Are there moments when leaders need to step in, advocate, or challenge the system from what you've seen in your organisation?
Yeah, I think for us, those women leaders that are given that opportunity and able to progress and get the support, then one of the things that I know Linfox has been doing, I think it does really well, is to continue to involve them and get them to share their story. Share their story with lots of other people about what's possible. And there's two people that come to mind for me that work in our business that have been able to progress and do different things in different roles. And that gives them greater status, I suppose, but it also it shows others what's possible. And when you get that sort of neutral level of respect and they feel comfortable to talk and speak up when things may be not right, then you do get greater fairness across the workforce. And that's not to say that some of these roles that, certainly some of the women in are really challenging. They are. And they need the support of, above and below to make it work. But I think certainly when you have women that are sort of progressing, getting the chance, supporting them, and then getting them to talk about their story, if they're comfortable to do that, really does help. And their own experience, people can take things from that. No matter what you do, no matter what your age is, there's always some benefits in that.
Yeah, I just have to agree with what Chris is saying. And when you're deliberately inviting different perspectives into a conversation, it makes the conversation a lot richer as well. We do get caught up in the fact that we're doing, actions all of the time and just getting stuff done to tick some boxes off. But when you kind of sit back as a leader and deliberately ask for somebody else's opinion, what do you think of that? The dialogue changes. The confidence and the safety within the room starts to take a breath and it's like, oh, yeah, okay, what do I think about that? That's a really good question. So, yeah, good on you, Chris.
And I think the most powerful acts of generosity aren't always those grand gestures. It's those small moments of belief in someone.
Wonderful. Yeah, and actually to dig into that topic of diversity too, I mean, diversity is not just about gender. I mean, diversity of thought, experience, diversity of perspectives. That's actually, it's so important for organizations, isn't it, to have that diversity of people's brains and experience, because that's what creates, innovation and thinking outside the box and being able to get better and better over time. So important. So that's the way I like to see diversity. It's actually about, it's not necessarily just a gender thing. It's about diversity of the humans that you have in the room or at the table.
I'll just add to that, Vanessa. We even in the workplace health and safety space or health and wellbeing, when we're out there trying to come up with solutions to even, it doesn't matter the size of the problem. Nothing is better to get that diverse range of thought in the room, and that's different levels of experience. That's different genders. That's different thinking at the table, and when you get that mix right, you can really get some great outcomes.
Absolutely. So, Eliza, I'd love to pick your brain about this because you've got such a wealth of experience working within mining resources yourself and obviously with AWMR. we need to look at how we build that psychological safety so that women can stay and progress in work, because ultimately there's a lot of factors that could have them leaving the industry. What sort of factors do you find helps an organisation to create that psychological safety so that women do want to stay and progress rather than leaving the industry?
Yeah, look, I think and I think it's topical. It's been topical for some time now, around psychological safety. I tried to break it down into smaller, manageable, understandable pieces. But I think if I come back to, the question around, generosity as well, I think that's a real part. So, it shows up in your time, it shows up in your intention, shows up in your sponsorship. And I said just a little bit earlier, when you're deliberate about creating different voices in the room, but they have to be heard, and then you have to actually act on them as well, right? So a lot of the times we need to only look at, our engagement surveys within, or employee perception surveys that the companies run with. The leading question on there is around, do I believe that you will do anything about it? And essentially, will you take action from me giving you this information? Most people think you won't. And they say, I know in a few companies I've worked for, it's been upwards about 70%. People don't even think that you're going to do anything about it. So hearing something and then taking action, I think psychological safety as a whole will continue to grow. I think we've learned a lot from physical safety. So we see a hazard, we put, whether or not it's danger tape, or we remove the hazard, we do something about it straight away. And most of the time, those are in the things that we can physically see. A lot of the time, psychological safety isn't seen. Well, we believe that it's not seen, but I know examples that people have shared with me, where people have been abusive, bullying others. That's pretty noticeable. When you look at the reflection of somebody else in there experiencing that. So we can still see it. So I think it's just more around, just addressing those things consistently. If we look at, unfair treatments and organisational injustice and things like that, if it's raised, do something about it. If somebody feels as if they're, potentially not being remunerated the same as somebody else, look into it, take that action. And I think that's where it comes back to then, that time and attention. And even from a sponsorship perspective, somebody shared something where they have experienced some form of harm, and we should sponsor them to make sure that harm's removed. So I think, big proponent for how we show up at work in a way that's safe for everybody, both physically and also mentally. So, yeah.
I think particularly for women, there are some underaddressed workplace health and safety issues like menopause, pregnancy-related risks, and they require stronger workplace health and safety systems and organisational commitment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to dig into this a bit more actually, because psychological safety is a felt experience, and I think a lot of organisations are, they have policies, they try to communicate that, this is a safe space, we're working to create safety for everyone, but at the end of the day, it's a felt experience, and like you said, Eliza, often people just they don't believe that they're going to be supported if they speak up. Or it could be that a long time ago in the past, they've heard of someone who spoke up and then, something negative happened. So I think this is a really important topic. How do we actually walk the talk there around creating psychological safety? What does it take? And maybe, Julia, I'll ask you first, from that sort of industry perspective, how do organisations actually show that they mean it in creating safety for women?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm getting a lot of feedback from our members that, who's doing it right. They're still struggling with the legislation, and we've got our national conference coming up in June in Adelaide, and we've got a lot of topics, a lot of speakers on psychosocial and psychological safety. Have we got it right? Is it over legislated? What does it mean in action as opposed to on paper? So yeah, there is a lot of confusion out there about how you demonstrate that to your employees.
Absolutely. And Chris, could you weigh in with the sorts of things that you do or you feel is needed to create psychological safety?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important is to make sure that it's embedded in your leadership program. what it actually is, what it looks like, some examples of where it's working, where it's not. It should be a foundational piece in any leadership training. Uh, and that really takes us to a point where that, when you do have trust in the room and people do feel comfortable to speak up, then most of us in the call would know, yeah, that's when you get your best outcomes. But when you get crickets and when you get just nobody willing to say anything, then that's probably a bit of a red flag that something's not right. We run a forum where it's called the 4Ds, which is a more of a safety program to try and engage the team to identify what's dumb, difficult, different, or dangerous about the work you do. And sometimes in those facilitated sessions, we'd even advocate for the leader it may be best that you're not actually involved in that initial discussion, and then we'll circle you in afterwards to sort of, make sure you've got all the real feedback, all the honest feedback.
Yeah.
And those sessions are a mix of male and female, again, coming back to the importance of you just need diverse thought in those environments. So if you nail that, and people are speaking up and talking to you about everything, then it's a bit of a sign that psychological safety is there. It doesn't mean it's there forever. It can quickly be undone, but there are some signs. So it's important. I think it starts with leadership. I think it starts with programs. Really good examples, solid examples, real examples.
Yeah, wonderful.
Collaboration with HR is really important, and that trauma-informed approach to any kind of investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes there's there can be a lot of pressure, expectation on people to speak up and to raise concerns. But it's also important to have a culture of upstanders as well. So if people see that someone is being treated badly, and it's not just women, but if there's any sort of harassment, bullying, things like that going on, I think we shouldn't just put the expectation on that person being bullied or harassed to speak up. But we want to actually have a culture where someone else will say, hey, listen, that's not cool, and have a conversation or raise it through, the appropriate channels. How do you think we do that? Is that a bit of an emphasis, not just putting that expectation on the people being bullied, but creating that culture of upstanders? What are your thoughts on this one? Eliza, I might go to you for that.
Thanks for the question. It's actually quite relevant. Well, it is relevant to me most days in my job, but just this past week I've been conducting some face-to-face engagements around a particular topic, around what does it feel like to work. As Vanessa shared earlier on in my intro, my day job is also as a social performance advisor for TEAS, as a mining services contractor and one of the largest in the world. We were engaging with female workforce just to understand what it feels like to work for us as a way for us to gain those insights and actually take some meaningful action. And it's interesting when you start to use words like bystander or upstander and try to use those more readily used terms. I think, if I can use that from a corporate lens, people have heard about it a bit in the media, have maybe not heard about it a little bit in the media. So I tried to reframe it in a way that, have you ever seen somebody openly yell at somebody in an open place? Have you ever seen somebody, potentially, not doing too well at work and, they're shedding a tear or anything like that? And you try to bring it back to some of those real things that are occurring in the workplace. And it doesn't happen all of the time. But when you start to make sure that you are connecting back to some real examples, and when we talk about, have you ever felt that, seen somebody, potentially being bullied over a regular period of time, or somebody who just shakes it off and laughs it off like it's, oh yeah, it's nothing. But later on you see them and they're really down. And when you start asking those questions, people are like, oh yeah, I have seen that. And you ask them, the next question is like, would you have felt like you could say something to them? Oh, no, I couldn't say that. And then you ask the next question. Okay, so tell me more about that. Why is that? Why is it you don't feel like that? And most of the times people will say, I've seen someone else do it, and I've seen them feel the repercussions. Somebody else has stood up and said, hey, oi, what you're saying is not appropriate. And then they have in turn, the pack has turned on them. So some of those things are barriers, but then I was also shared some fantastic examples where there's more senior people, not in seniority of hierarchy, but have been well respected and very knowledgeable within their trade, and they just simply say, "Oi." And then the carry of their voice is something that's like, you're not being, told on by your teacher. I'm being told on by Jack, who, helps me do my job. So, that peer-to-peer response, it can be as simple as that. And in a lot of the time in our working environments, that's what it is. You're not going to have somebody come up with a well-polished response to poor behavior that they're observing. They've just found a way to use that language. And there are some really great examples of that occurring. And when you say, well, okay, that's being a bystander or that's being an upstander. And they're like, oh, I thought that was just Jack being Jack. And I was like, okay. So, it's just, really piecing out some of those conversations. And I think, showing up consistently. Once the same, Jack has got some standards and, he speaks up. And hopefully it's not often, but when he does, people start to say, oh, yeah, maybe I stepped over the line there.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, leadership, like Chris said, leadership is so important as well to create that guidance and show that you really mean it. Pardon me. There's a lot of organisations where Rebecca in the chat actually mentioned that we're doing some work with them around psychological safety, and they also run a creating respectful workplace training in their in Horizon. And lots of organisations are doing training around respectful behaviours and that sort of thing. But we need to be really intentional when we put on training like that and make sure that we back it up with real leadership action, because people will see if, everyone's been put through this training about respectful behaviour, but then last week when, someone was being bullied or was spoken to really unfairly, leadership did nothing. And, we can really break that effort to create a better workplace if we don't show that we mean it by leadership action. Chris, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, putting people through training around these sorts of topics to create a better workplace? Awesome. What needs to happen though after the training?
We're just embarking on some psychosocial risk training. It's a bit of a tricky word. Not everyone really, to be honest, not many people even understand what that means. And so it gets to the crust, though, of the fact, and I think Julia might have mentioned this earlier, which is, we can't just let bad experiences of work be discovered and then we go and try and put out the fire. The psychosocial risk piece, and it's going to be around workplaces for a long time now, is very much about trying to put a finger on where parts of the system of work, whether that's rosters, how much control you have over change, where that might not be working. And then it's up to leaders then to make the change. So we rely on the team to sort of tell us and to guide us, but then it is a leadership gig to then try and do something about it. Probably one of the biggest mistakes that I think leaders can make is that it maybe unintentionally are expected to have all the answers, but that's absolutely not the case. So, I mean, one of the things that we try to do at Linfox is to try and encourage leaders to go and talk, listen, and learn from those who do the work every day. Again, coming back to getting diverse range of thought to hopefully come up with the better outcomes. And psychosocial risk is a good one, and rosters is a challenge for our business. And I've seen many examples and heard many examples where just collaborating a bit more with the drivers and the schedulers and those in a leadership role can provide a slightly more flexible roster potentially. It might be able to reduce fatigue. It may suit the family a bit better at home. So there's a little bit in that, but it's not just about expecting the person to go and be the only one that's got to go and do the stuff. It's a leadership piece that, what if the rosters are not right? It's over to you to see what you can do about it. Now, they're hard. I'm not saying there's an easy solution for some of these things because we're sort of embedded with a lot of tradition, but you've got to start the conversation.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I'm interested in how you deal with pushback around topics like psychosocial safety, and creating a safer workplace for women, etc. We know that sometimes there can be people that push back on the need to work on this, or they might roll their eyes. How would you deal with people in your industry who might sort of say, "Oh, isn't there enough focus on women already?" Or, some people say, "Well, this is the workplace, this is the job. If you can't hack it, that's a you problem." What are your thoughts on that, Julia? I'll start with you.
Yeah, it is an interesting question because, like, even in recruitment, people say, "Oh, you've got to recruit a woman," and at the end of the day, like, I just want the best person for the job. But it's things about making sure there's equal opportunity given to women as there are men. It's not just only focusing on women. So if just for a recruitment or a job promotion, it would be, I want 3 men CVs and 3 female CVs. And then out of that, I would choose the best person for the job. And so that equality comes into it, not just that singular focus on women. But I think as a woman, it was really important for me through my leadership journey, as you said, to have that sponsorship and that mentorship for some really great leaders that I want to carry that forward. So for me, it's a personal thing for me as well.
Yeah, that's right. And we're not aware of our own biases, right? So there's been some really fantastic studies about looking at who gets different positions when they apply for jobs, and when the gender is and names are de-identified. It's really interesting to see what changes in terms of who is chosen for the role. So yeah, I think it is something that, we might just make an assumption that everything's fine, we don't need to take action, but we may be operating from some unconscious biases there as well.
I think I'd just like to add on that as well, is that any diversity, equity, and inclusion aspirations that we might have to make our workplaces better for everybody, it's less about programs. And it's more about utilising the full extent and capability of the workforce that we have. And I think when you start to do that, you start to get a little bit more out of, not more out of everybody, but you start to, pinpoint some passions and some enthusiasm about where they can deliver value. That in turn creates a better workplace. Once again, I keep coming back to it, a better place for everybody, not necessarily, that particular individual. So knowing who your team is really important, knowing what motivates them, what they value, what their aspirations are, what their previous experience has been, because, it doesn't matter whether or not you're a first year grad. I'm sure that there's been experiences that, they have that can teach us, a thing or two about commencing into the workforce and the resilience that's required these days, and particularly within the mining industry. We have a shortage of skills, and it's only, particularly here in southeast Queensland with the Olympics coming up, is there's more and more pressure on that, and so there's still a vast workforce out there that we're able to tap into, and I think, whether or not we're losing capable people or we're not designing the work in a way that people want to continue to do it for a long time. We have aging workforces as well, so everybody doesn't want to be swinging. I'll use the swinging the hammer or swinging the the spanner, a heavy spanner. Let's design that stuff out. Working with OEMs and things like that, innovative ways that we can lessen the load and the toil on all of our workforce is just going to make us more productive. It's going to make us more safer. And it's going to make our industries even that even bit better to want to get involved in and be competitive. So yeah, I think it's less about, for me particularly, it's less about the programs, and the pushback that you would hear is, oh well, why are we doing this? Often D&I programs are seen as tack on. They're seen as an additional thing on the side rather than the main thing that we need to try to focus on. So yeah, I've heard the pushback in different ways, Vanessa. Just the other week, I had heard that somebody experienced somebody saying, what would you know? You're only a woman.
Yeah, it's still...
so there is still that as well. So that's a knowledge thing rather than a swing and a spanner thing.
Yeah, that's right. And great point that, improvements for women actually is improvements across the board for our whole workplace. So, I think everyone really, we deserve to have healthy workplaces where we can feel safe, you know, from not just physically, but socially and psychologically as well. So, you know, that's what it's all about. I'd like to ask a question around allyship, and in particularly, you know, it's very important that men can be our allies in this field. So what advice, and I'll go to you, Chris, first of all, what advice would you give to other men who want to support equality, but maybe they're not sure when to step in or when to step back?
I'm not sure there's any perfect science to this one. And I know I've sort of harped on a little bit and keep coming back to it, but the things that I've seen work are when we we have something and we showcase it and we tell others about it and we show the outcomes you get. And so those that might be skeptical, whether that be male or female, nothing's better than actually seeing it to then be and then to make a judgment on it. And the example I'll give you is that sort of outside of Linfox, we've partnered with the Penrith Rugby League club, and because they have a women's program as part of their rugby league team, and one of the challenges they have is trying to find employment for the women. So they're very talented sportsmen, but quite often some of them haven't progressed to land a job yet. And so one of our locations in New South Wales made contact, and then they were able to offer 4 of the girls an experience to see what it'd be like working in one of our warehouses. And it was really successful. And then the marketing guys heard about it and they went and interviewed the 4 girls. And nothing is more powerful than hearing from what their experience is like from going from nothing to something, and just be given that chance and opportunity. So there's a lot of men in that shed, and one of the leaders was a male, and he was a complete advocate for it. And one of those females is actually going to go on and become a team leader. So developing really quickly.
Yeah.
So you can talk about it or you can show it.
Mm.
And I think when you can show it and there might be doubters out there or that are just not sure, then I think that helps to overcome some of that stuff.
Yeah. Love that. Absolutely. Seeing other men, you know, like you say, championing, telling those stories, elevating women, it's seeing demonstration of that in your workplace. I think that's so powerful. Yeah.
The thing's also removing those barriers, Chris. So, you know, getting the things that are in the way, removing them so that people can come through. So you've established that pathway. That's good leadership, isn't it? Really?
You said at the start, Eliza, it's creating the entry points, right? So the more entry points you have, the real programs allow people to test the water in whatever industry it is. For the most part, it's going to give good outcomes. Yeah.
So people on the call, I invite you to ask any questions that you have for our panelists so that we can get to those before the end. But Julia, I'd like to ask you a bit of a future-focused question here. If you look ahead 5 to 10 years, what would you like to see happening in the industry across health and safety and helping women to elevate? Where would you like to see the industry in 10 years?
Yeah, well, in 5 to 10 years, Vanessa, I think the industry wouldn't just feel different, it would actually be structurally different. And as Chris went back to it as well, we can't continue to change people. We've actually got to change the systems and the entries and things like that. So I think if we looked at leadership, like if you looked at a profession that only promoted those who look like the leaders now, you're not going to progress into the future. So we've really got to think about that diversity, because leadership isn't going to necessarily be the same as it is now.
Nice. Yep. So it takes systems change, organizational change, as well as, waiting for people to actually try to get themselves promoted, etc. Yeah, we need to create channels.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate that every time one of my mentors has said, make sure you put that on your CV, because they know I may not be there forever, but they are actually promoting career progression. So yeah, make sure you put that on your CV. That's demonstrated experience. You may not have a qualification, but it gives you that next level of where can I go in my career? What have I already experienced? And we always say it's skills, knowledge, and experience that makes up a true professional in whatever field they're in.
Yeah, wonderful. Eliza, I'd like to ask you, from your background, your work often involves challenging entrenched systems. So what has helped shape your own leadership journey, and where have you personally drawn support and sponsorship throughout your leadership journey?
Yeah, okay. Um, yeah, I'll go with the personal inspiration, and I'll use a more recent example as well. As a former colleague, we've interacted with each other from time to time, introduced me to somebody within their network of friends as well. There was something that I was working on, and they simply said, I'm going to reach out to such and such, and I'm going to introduce you. So it's just a small, quick, short message. And often, if I think back, it's been those short, sharp interactions or connection points that other people have done for me in my career, internally to the companies that I've been working for, sharing that I'm working on a challenge, and they said, look, I can't, I don't think I can help you with that, but let me get in touch with, Sally. She seems to be across that stuff a little bit more than me. Whatever that looks like is that I think advocacy, you can call it that, support, you can call it that, but I think it's a willingness to want to win together. So I can see that I've got a struggle. I can't help you, but I want to see if somebody else can help you so that we can all be successful together. So there's been those micro, I don't know if there's a fancy word for them, I don't know, Vanessa, but those little micro interactions throughout my career. And there's been some really big ones too. There's been some big ones in terms of how my career trajectory may have been going. And an inflection point for a senior female leader, and I will say that, which was fantastic for me. Showed me a different way. Would you be interested in doing this opportunity? I think you would have been great at it. It's a simple conversation like that as well. And my career went in a completely different direction. It's been great. And I've learned lots since then. But prior to that, I was steadfast on where my progression was going, and it was linear. It was, kind of straight up. I want to go to this level of career progression. I want to go to that level of career progression within my set field. That field has now been wide open, and I'm forever grateful for that opportunity. But if I come back even to early on, I didn't start out in the mining industry. I started out in, health as an exercise physiologist. So one of the first real chances I got was I was working as an admin clerk. For a processing facility, we were looking to ramp up, and a male mentor of mine, who happened to be, the SSE and the boss of the show, came and spoke to me about being a superintendent. I didn't have any line leadership skills. I wasn't a supervisor, so my linear path hadn't been created as yet. But he seen something in me, and he knew that, I knew actually that had I been in a position where I would have stumbled or misstep or had extremely nervous instances of building a whole team and bringing a plant back online, that he was there. So I think it's that safety net as well. And in all of those three instances, I've always known that someone who has trusted me, seen something in me, was always there to pick me up. And I think that's that's just something that I try to do as well for others, because I have had a fantastic experience within the mining industry. Over that time, an absence of bullying, an absence of discrimination, an absence of, feeling less than by somebody else. So I can only do that is to pay it forward, and I think that's all we can really do.
Yeah, wonderful. I've just seen a really good question in the chat here from Catherine, and I'd love to give this some airtime. She says, what are some tips to work with men in an organisation that have worked for them for 20 plus years who refuse to change their views? And I can imagine that this is coming from a personal experience of being surrounded by, and it is sometimes the people who've been working within that role, within that industry for a long, long period of time. We come across sometimes people with quite stubborn mindsets. What advice would you give to someone experiencing that? Maybe they're surrounded by these sorts of men who refuse to change their views. I'll open that up. I can see, Chris, you're thinking. Who wants to jump in there?
The question is this a leader or just a co-worker, because I'd be really looking to leadership to assist in changing that behaviour, as opposed to me as the individual feeling that. Because I think that leaders should be recognised not only for what they achieve, but for who they elevate as well. And they may be intimidated by some reason of that individual, but it really comes back to changing that culture.
That's right.
Yeah, I have a view on that one as well. This is a good question. It's not an easy one to answer, I don't think. I'm a believer that you just need to keep finding the right advocates to take that message, and that with the weight of those that are in your corner, it will continue to put pressure on the pockets that are just not being receptive to this stuff. And eventually, and it may not be the perfect answer, but eventually through time, there will be change. And I've seen it as well, where, some male leaders, once they get past that point of whatever the resistance is, and they start connecting with female leaders, and they build up a bit of a rapport, then I don't know, it's a sense that, okay, maybe things can change, but it can be quite difficult. I think there's always advocates in the workplace that are truly supportive of the diversity and women in any role, and you've just got to find them sometimes, I think, and just link with those people to help you with what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Yep, fantastic.
And I think from my perspective as well, it's understanding what are their views, where are they coming from? Like there's always been a lived experience of somebody else that we're working with that isn't ours, because we're all different. So they might have had a horrible experience of working, with someone much the same as, the person next to them, and that has stopped them. So I think it always comes from a space of curiosity, less about changing their views, but more about informing or sharing, the barriers that are being experienced from underrepresented team members, and whether or not that's from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective, whether it's from a female perspective, LGBTQ+, we always have a different experience and a lens that we bring to everything. So sometimes we don't need it changed. We might just need to be a little bit more aware and come from an insight perspective of curiosity. So why is it that you think like that? Maybe that they have a willingness to share. And we do know that vulnerability is not often something that we do well either. So it could be a learning experience for both team members, and hopefully, lean into the conversation, less about changing them, but more about understanding them, I think. That'd be my advice.
Yeah, and from my perspective, when these things are happening, and when people speak up that they are experiencing bullying, harassment, disrespect, those sorts of things, we must make sure that our leaders take action, because if leaders don't take action, it's detrimental. And I think that we need to actually, sometimes organizations are hesitant to get rid of leaders, for instance, because they do their job well, or they're a high performer. But we need to start thinking about culture. We can't shift culture if we have leaders who turn a blind eye, won't take action, won't speak up on behalf of people who are being unfairly treated. So, that's, I'm very passionate about that. And I think we need to start hiring more for culture fit and, characteristic, rather than just skills and performance. We're nearly at time. So just to finish, I'd just like to quickly go around and ask you, what is one thing that you feel organizations can do to create a safer space for women in the workplace? Chris?
I would say I think it's about, there's lots, but making sure that within your team you actually have women. I'm very lucky. My whole team is women, and you said it earlier, Vanessa. The broader team beyond that, we have women that have got great roles everywhere. So it's a bit of a deliberate effort to choose the best, but to also make sure you've got that really diverse group in the mix. Yep.
Fantastic. Julia, one thing you'd encourage organisations?
Look for the forms of impact that often create long-term change, but don't always command that loudest applause. So look for and recognise influence, collaboration, culture building, ethics, things like that, because that will create long-term change, not just the short-term tick the box, I've got so many women on my team, etc.
Wonderful. And Eliza?
Yeah, for me, I would probably just go to your line leaders, is actively sponsor someone, put their name forward in a way, because that takes bravery to advocate for someone. So put their name forward for something, invite them into a room or into a meeting that you think that they might be feeling excluded from, or that they can learn from. Because I think it's those small things that I just shared around, my career, but it's those small decisions that really do shape careers. And then that will collectively shape your company and then shape the broader industry. So yeah, that would probably be my active generosity. If we stick with the theme, Vanessa, is just actively sponsor someone.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being involved in this great chat today. I really appreciate it. And I know the listeners do too.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks all.
Awesome. If you're interested in exploring more ways to drive diversity and inclusion through positive safety, make sure you check out our positive safety portal. This is, excuse me, a fantastic library of resources with everything from research to toolkits, and it's aimed at supporting everyone from decision makers to leaders to frontline workers. And that concludes our session on how generosity drives equality. We'd like to say a massive thank you to Vanessa, Eliza, Julia, and Chris for making this such a great session, and to everyone for joining us today. As you exit Zoom, a feedback form will pop up, and we ask that you please take a minute to let us know your thoughts on today's session, and also what topics would help you in the future. Have a fantastic day, stay safe, and we look forward to catching up again in our next webinar.
Thanks all.